Imagine standing naked in a courtroom. Priests, judges, and matrons are watching you. Your marriage, your inheritance, your very honor depend on a single private act performed right here, right now, in public. This was not a nightmare. This was the law. For centuries in medieval Europe, the bedroom was a political stage, not a private sanctuary. Forget the romanticized tales of knights and ladies. The reality was a shocking world of legal humiliation, royal incest, and horrifying public executions for intimate crimes. What truly happened behind the closed, heavy doors of the Middle Ages? We're about to expose the bizarre punishments and deep-seated scandals that shattered lives and secretly shaped entire dynasties. But first, take a moment. Make sure to subscribe to join our journey through history's shadows, and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Medieval courts routinely compelled couples to perform sexual intercourse publicly to confirm the legitimacy of their union. The heavy oak doors would creak shut, sealing a married couple in a room with an imposing panel of priests, matrons, and judges. The silence was agonizing, overshadowed only by the question that was both deeply personal and publicly humiliating. Is this marriage physically valid? This wasn't just a rumor. In 14th century France and Italy, these so-called processes through Congress were legally enshrined. If a woman claimed her husband was unable to fulfill his marital duties, or if a significant inheritance was at stake, the couple was required to demonstrate their union before witnesses physically. In later cases, a midwife and sworn matrons were summoned to testify whether the act had actually been completed. A nobleman in Paris became infamous when he failed to consummate 3 consecutive marriages before the officials. Each union was immediately annulled, and his name quickly became a whispered cautionary tale in courtly circles. Why this extreme level of scrutiny? Because marriage was not merely a private affair, it was fundamentally political. Without legal heirs, entire dynasties risked collapse. Records indicate that in certain regions, up to 1 in 10 marital disputes revolved around accusations of impotence. What we would consider an outrageous invasion of privacy, medieval society viewed as essential for safeguarding land, titles, and bloodlines. The imagery is profoundly unsettling. Intimacy transformed into a judicial ritual. Private shame was repurposed as a public spectacle. Yet this was the accepted order. But if the law could so easily humiliate ordinary nobles, what compromises were the great dynasties willing to make behind closed doors, far from any witnesses? The trail leads us deeper into the royal chambers, where preserving the purity of the bloodline sometimes meant crossing the most forbidden boundaries imaginable. To maintain their grip on power, royal families frequently bred within their own bloodlines. The gold and jewels on the banquet table gleamed, hiding a strange, emerging truth. The bride and groom shared a grandfather. Why would the wealthiest dynasties in Europe intermarry so closely, even at the risk of devastating scandal? The simplest answer was control. Royal blood was treated as a sacred commodity that must never be diluted by outsiders. Families like the Visconti of Milan were notorious for pushing these limits. Chroniclers accused Bernabo Visconti of taking his own daughters as female companions. This may have been mere slander spread by enemies. However, the sheer distance this story traveled demonstrates how easily such rumors gain traction in aristocratic society. Closed marriages had terrible consequences. Some heirs were born frail, others suffered from mental instability. Eventually, the distinct, characteristic jawline of the Habsburg dynasty became a physical marker, a symbol of the dangers inherent in an obsessively pure bloodline perpetuated over centuries of inbreeding. The contradiction is stark. Commoners faced brutal punishment for adultery, yet nobles invented a new morality to suit dynastic needs, turning a forbidden act into an accepted practice when wealth and influence were on the line. What happened in the villages, where ordinary people had no protection from the law's most merciless penalties? To find out, we must leave the royal halls and step onto the rural fields. Sodomy trials often led to the joint execution of both humans and animals in public spectacles. For many rural communities, the deepest fear was not of robbers or famine, but of an indictment for crimes against nature. 15th century court records from Switzerland document over 100 cases of criminal proceedings for sodomy in a single decade, revealing how widespread and terrifying these accusations were. Farmers, shepherds, and even boys were named in court, often based on the testimony of suspicious neighbors. The punishments were severe, designed to destroy the accused and eliminate the allegedly complicit animal. Men could be sentenced to death by hanging or burning, with the associated animal executed right beside them, as if it were a fellow conspirator. A notorious case from Basel in 1466 details a pig dressed in a coat and trousers before being executed alongside its owner, a gruesome parody of human justice. Why this extreme severity? Medieval clergy argued that blurring the line between human and animal endangered the entire moral order. Some chroniclers even blamed local epidemics or crop failures on communities where such sins were uncovered, as if a collective divine judgment had descended. The sheer volume of these trials reveals both the terror and the morbid fascination surrounding them. And if common men could face execution for imaginary crimes with animals, what happened when the accusation involved something even more disturbing? Soldiers and farmers caught practicing necrophilia were often burned alive as punishment. Of all the sins feared in medieval Europe, hardly any was considered more unthinkable than violating the dignity of the dead. Though rare, the cases documented in chronicles are horrifying. A 14th-century German account describes a soldier caught in the act following a battle. He was immediately arrested and burned by his own regiment. His fate served as both punishment and a brutal warning. In England, 1233 court records mention a grave robber who repeatedly confessed to defiling cemeteries. These confessions, taken as proof of the worst possible offense, led to swift execution. The Church viewed necrophilia as the ultimate violation, not just of human purity, but of the divine promise of resurrection itself. Burning was a common penalty, ensuring that both the body and the reputation of the offender were reduced to ash, and the shame endured for generations. Yet, historians note a strange silence. Only a handful of cases appear in the records, raising questions. Some scholars suspect that confessions coerced through torture may have exaggerated the reality. But their mere existence proves how deep the fear ran. If even the dead offered no safety, what was the state of the living, especially those enclosed within monastery walls? Monasteries, supposedly havens of piety, were often riddled with scandals and secrets of same-sex relationships. Records reveal a much more complex history, one full of whispered rumors, harsh penances, and scandals that unfolded over centuries. Visiting bishops frequently reported discovering unnatural relations among monks, secret trysts, shared rooms, and encrypted messages left hidden within the abbey walls. The clergy were especially concerned with what they termed the solitary vice. 13th-century manuals listed it as a sin requiring long fasts on bread and water or severe public floggings for repeat offenders. The very frequency of these rules suggests how widespread the concern must have been. Some abbeys installed wooden partitions between beds to resist temptation. The contradiction is profound. The same institutions that produced illuminated manuscripts, preserved knowledge, and delivered sermons on virtue also had bishops' letters and monastic chronicles describing scandals so frequently that major reform councils had to be convened. The Bishop of Lincoln, in 1290, famously complained that monks were chained together in pairs and threes, as if driven by lust. Whether exaggerated or not, the statement encapsulated the widespread turmoil. If monasteries couldn't suppress these temptations, what happened when accusations of sin spilled out beyond the cloister into the wider villages, where fear and rumor would soon fuel the brutal machinery of the witch trials? The witch panic, which took full hold across Europe by the late 15th century, brought with it even more intimate and intrusive investigations. The accusations spiraled out of control, transforming sexuality into both a political weapon and a dark obsession within the burgeoning witch trials. Inquisitors ruthlessly searched accused women for the devil's mark, often demanding invasive, humiliating examinations of the defendant's body. Across parts of Germany, entire committees of men oversaw these perverse investigations where justice and pure cruelty chillingly merged. Confessions were brutally coerced through torture, often saturated with dark sexual imagery. Manuals like the infamous Malleus Maleficarum, Hammer of Witches, insisted that witches engaged in carnal union with the devil as a demonic husband, an idea that directly shaped the course of every interrogation. Under this unbearable pressure, women confessed to nightly gatherings where they allegedly danced in the hundreds, celebrated dark masses, and surrendered themselves to infernal spirits. These visions reflected the interrogators' twisted imaginations far more than any grounded reality. The resulting punishments were extreme, characterized by disturbing public theatricality. Victims were often paraded through cities in humiliation or subjected to symbolic, brutal cleansings. Records from certain German dioceses show hundreds of executions registered in a single year, many explicitly linked to the allegation of sexual relations with demons. The scale of this persecution was shocking, an industrialized atrocity fueled equally by religious piety and deep-seated fear. The crowds gathered not just out of moral duty, but morbid curiosity. The trials dangerously blurred the line between religious ritual and dark public entertainment. This period lays bare a society where faith, fear, and human sexuality collided with catastrophic results. If the hysteria surrounding witches could escalate to such extremes, what happened when ordinary city dwellers began to embrace rituals of blood and reckless desire themselves? The flagellant movement emerged as a direct, fearful response to the devastating Black Plague, which raged across Europe between 1347 and 1351, killing nearly half the continent's population. In its wake, terror fueled strange, spectacular movements. The most notorious groups were the flagellants. Barefoot throngs marching through cities, savagely whipping themselves bloody, convinced that this self-inflicted suffering would appease divine wrath. Initially, they were met with genuine awe, even reverence. However, chronicles from Strasbourg and Frankfurt hint at much darker consequences. After days of frenzied, hypnotic processions, rumors spread of chaotic nightly gatherings where prayer and discipline collapsed into pure disinhibition, transforming pain into strange forms of gratification. Whether every account was true or exaggerated, the image quickly took hold, fueling both public fascination and alarm. By 1349, thousands of these groups roamed Germany, Flanders, and Bohemia. They condemned the church itself as corrupt, but their own public spectacles were equally controversial. Letters from the clergy paved the way, detailing unspeakable acts committed under the guise of repentance. Pope Clement VI ultimately ordered their disbandment, fearing the heresies and scandals their bloody processions represented more than the plague itself. When the masses could lose control completely in the shadow of the Black Death, what decisions were being made in the private chambers of the nobility? Canon law technically permitted girls to marry at age 12 and boys at 14, but noble families routinely arranged far earlier marriages. For them, marriage was a strategic tool, entirely devoid of personal affection. Chroniclers report weddings for children as young as 9 or 10, their futures sealed in candlelit halls where alliances were weighed like silver coins. One of the most famous examples was the marriage of English King Richard II to Isabella of Valois in 1396. She was 6 years old. Although the union was never consummated during her childhood, its very existence demonstrates how little age factored in when kingdoms sought peace or power. At other courts, restraint was not always observed. Records in Aragon detail a nobleman who formally stipulated the fertility of his 10-year-old bride in contracts, treating her body as another piece of property. The scale of this practice is hard to ignore. Historians estimate that in 14th and 15th century Castile, over 30% of noble brides were under the age of 13 at the time of their wedding. This urgency was partly a survival mechanism. High mortality rates necessitated rushing to secure family heirs before dynasties were swept away. The church sometimes objected, but papal dispensations and fees swiftly silenced any resistance. And while minor children were being traded in cold, contractual exchanges, the same society that sanctioned this agreement celebrated adultery as a fashionable pastime among the elite. Don't forget to hit the like button if you're finding these historical secrets shocking. For ordinary citizens, adultery could lead to banishment, public floggings, or worse. At the noble courts, however, the same act morphed into something almost recreational. In 12th and 13th century France, figures like Eleanor of Aquitaine and her daughter Marie of Champagne presided over the legendary courts of love, where extraordinary passion was debated as a high art. The culture of the troubadour spread this ideal across Europe, celebrating secret meetings, moonlight escapes, and love ladders scaled against castle walls in hundreds of songs and poems. One of the most defining statements came in 1174 when Marie de Champagne allegedly declared that true love cannot exist within marriage. For many aristocrats, this redefined fidelity. Marriage was a duty, while true passion was sought outside of the marital bond. The church fought back, condemning these ideas as dangerous and immoral, yet their influence permeated literary works like The Romance of the Rose and shaped the chivalric code. Behind the poetic veneer, however, lay real scandal. Queens rumored to have favorites, dukes accused of pursuing their rivals' wives, and knights fighting fatal duels over jealousy. And if aristocrats treated adultery as a sophisticated game, where did ordinary city dwellers go when they sought intimacy outside the lines of marriage? Medieval cities often taxed and regulated prostitution as a necessary sin. Across Europe, the practice was not only tolerated but regulated, sometimes even by the church itself. Cities like Avignon, Paris, and London licensed, taxed, and supervised brothels. Authorities imposed strict dress codes so that the women working there were easily recognizable. In Nuremberg, for instance, they were banned from wearing veils or hoods, making them simultaneously visible and marginalized. How did society justify this? The answer lay in a peculiar piece of logic. Influential voices like Saint Augustine argued that prostitution served as a protection mechanism. It was better to confine desire within controlled brothels than risk disrupting respectable households. Canon law even classified it as a lesser sin than solitary masturbation, as it still served the purpose of interaction. Public sermons regularly condemned the practice, yet records show that the clergy were often among the frequent clientele of officially sanctioned brothels. In 15th century London, the famed brothels of Southwark paid fees directly to the crown, effectively turning vice into revenue. In Zurich, sex workers had to register with city authorities and undergo regular checks. Violations of regulations could bring fines, expulsion, or public humiliation. Nevertheless, it remained one of the few avenues for many women to earn an income in a society that offered them little autonomy. Chroniclers reveal the disparity. Some women rose to become powerful courtesans, courted and favored by nobles. Others lived and died in abject poverty, their names erased. This profession, simultaneously condemned and institutionalized, reveals how medieval society pragmatically balanced morality with necessity. And perhaps that is the most revealing truth of all. What was called a necessary sin was by no means an exception, but a functional pillar of everyday life, woven into law, economics, and culture alike. These were the most scandalous practices of the Middle Ages. Which one shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this video compelling, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell notification so you don't miss our next deep dive into history's forgotten corners. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.